Disclaimer: the following program is designed to offend, provoke, and challenge your religious sensibilities. It contains content that will likely offend anyone who holds religion sacred. This is for those with thick skin or a taste for the harsh truth. If you're easily offended or cherish your religious views, please turn off now. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. You have been warned. Ghosts, saints, demons in boats, Jesus handing out wedding rings to nuns. Welcome to the holy hallucination circus, where every fever dream becomes divine truth and every mental breakdown gets a bishop's endorsement. Voltaire watched the church hand out sainthood for seeing chickens, and he had one question. Are you serious right now? His essay, Apparition, doesn't waste time. He cuts straight through the sacred fog and says what no priest ever will. Most visions are just your brain short-circuiting. Trauma, guilt, fever, sleep deprivation. That's the real holy trinity behind half the miracles in your catechism class. And when someone does hallucinate, conveniently the message is never, hey, stop killing people. It's always, keep paying your tithe and obeying your bishop. Today, we let Voltaire drag these so-called visions into the light. From ghost stories to divine poultry, nothing's safe. So pour yourself a drink, because I always drink with Voltaire, and open your third eye and try not to catch stigmata before the credits roll. Smash that like button, subscribe for more, and share with somebody to get the word out. Let's do this Voltaire style. Voltaire opens with an obvious statement that normal people with any kind of intelligence already understand. When people are overwhelmed, terrified, guilty, grieving, their brains start inventing things. Not metaphorically, literally. You see things that aren't there. He gives 3 examples. Let's break them down one by one. A woman was accused of helping murder her husband. In court, they hold up his coat, just the coat, and she collapses, saying she sees her husband standing in front of her. She tries to hug the air. That's not a ghost. That's trauma short-circuiting her senses. In this instance, we don't have the exact trial record, but this kind of courtroom panic was reported in period literature and legal commentary. Voltaire uses it as a clear example of emotional overload masquerading as a supernatural event. Theodoric the Great, real guy, king of the Ostrogoths in the 6th century. He had Symmachus, a Roman noble, executed. Later, he was reportedly haunted by guilt. Voltaire says Theodoric once looked at a fish on his plate and saw Symmachus's head instead. That's not a documented historical event. It's a story from medieval legend used to show how guilt projects itself into your senses. You kill a man, and suddenly dinner stares back. Voltaire's jab: whether it was murder or official executions, it makes no difference to your conscience. You still see the face in the fish. Charles IX of France, 100% real, ordered the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572, where thousands of French Protestants were slaughtered. Voltaire says that after this, Charles couldn't sleep. He kept seeing blood and corpses, not in dreams, but while fully awake. His doctor and nurse supposedly witnessed these breakdowns. That story checks out. Multiple historical sources, including court accounts and later biographies, describe Charles descending into insomnia, paranoia, and hallucinations after the massacre. He died a few years later, sick, raving, and deeply disturbed. So no, this wasn't God punishing him with visions. It was a young king unraveling under the psychological collapse that follows mass murder. Voltaire's point is that people in extreme emotional states hallucinate. Guilt, grief, fear, they all hijack your senses. Voltaire even warns, without reason to filter this mess, humans would be stuck in a constant state of delusion. Everyone would be seeing ghosts, hearing voices, and screaming about visions 24/7. These aren't spiritual events. They're emotional meltdowns. He's not mocking the people for suffering. He's mocking the church for turning those breakdowns into divine revelations. If you're seeing the face of a man you killed in your soup, maybe it's not judgment from heaven. Maybe it's just the logical consequence of being a killer with a guilty conscience. Now, Voltaire zooms in on the twilight zone, that blurry space between being asleep and awake, and asks, you know that weird moment where you're not fully conscious and your brain starts throwing random images and voices at you? Yeah. Religion calls that divine communication. He describes exactly what happens. When your brain is tired, stressed, or overheated, it starts inventing sounds and pictures. You see things that aren't there. You hear voices that don't exist, not because you're chosen, because your nervous system is glitching. Voltaire lists the real culprits: fear, love, grief, remorse. These aren't messengers from God. They're emotional stressors painting hallucinations on the inside of your skull. And to drive the point home, he gives a physical comparison. The eye, which sees sparks in the night when pressed, is just a faint image of what the brain does when it's disturbed. So he's saying your brain, like your eyeballs, can be fooled by pressure, physical or emotional. You don't need a demon or an angel. You just need the right amount of mental strain. Then Voltaire adds a little sarcasm. He says, of course, no theologian doubts that God sometimes piggybacks on these natural hallucinations, because of course not. That would ruin the whole business model. Instead, they claim these fuzzy, semi-conscious episodes are exactly when God chooses to show up, right when you're least able to think clearly. And where's their proof? Oh, right, the Bible. To this, the Old and New Testament bear ample testimony. Yeah, they do. Prophets dreaming things, kings hearing voices, apostles seeing lights, all conveniently during trances, dreams, or breakdowns. Voltaire's not being subtle. He's saying your holy book is full of people hallucinating and calling it truth. And people who believe the Bible is true, they just nod along like that's perfectly normal behavior. I think most of the people in my comments would agree that it isn't normal behavior, maybe with the exception of Carmine. What Voltaire's pointing out, again, is that religion loves to exploit brain glitches, especially the ones that happen when you're half asleep, emotionally destroyed, or running a fever. God doesn't speak clearly at noon. He whispers in the dark, right when your brain is least reliable. And the church, it builds doctrine out of your sleep paralysis episodes. Now, Voltaire turns to a favorite trick of religious history. Someone has a vision and people start dying. He says that over time, a lot of deeply religious people convinced themselves they were talking to God, when really their brains were just overheating. They weren't faking, they were sincerely delusional. And instead of treating them, churches declared them holy. Voltaire's solution? There is need of the advice of an honest man, and especially of a good physician. In other words, don't give them incense, give them a medical referral. Next, he talks about St. Theodore of Amasia, a 4th century soldier who supposedly saw a vision and decided God wanted him to burn down a pagan temple. So he did. Several people died, the city retaliated, Christians got blamed, it was a disaster. And Voltaire, deadpan as ever, says it is very likely that God did not command this action, in itself so criminal. That's Voltaire being polite. What he means is this was religious terrorism. Now, here's the historical context. This story does appear in early Christian saint biographies. It claims Theodore was martyred for refusing to worship Roman gods, and that he burned the temple on divine orders. But there's no independent evidence this ever happened. No court record, no Roman source, just religious storytelling. Voltaire knows that. He's calling it what it is. A legend used to excuse violence and make a criminal act sound like divine obedience. So pretty much, if the hallucination supports your religion, you call it a miracle. If it doesn't, you call it madness. St. Theodore wasn't guided by God. He was guided by a vision. And no one was brave enough to say, this man needs help. Now, Voltaire moves from hallucinations to animated afterlife garbage, and he's not even pretending to take it seriously. First up, we get God might permit Saint Potamien to appear to Saint Basilides. So, quick context here for people not familiar. Potamien was a Christian martyr from Alexandria, supposedly tortured and executed in the 3rd century. Legend says she later appeared to her executioner, Basilides, who converted and became a saint. Voltaire's response is, okay, fine, maybe. Nobody died from that one. No buildings burned. I'll allow it. He even throws in a second gimme. We will not deny that Jesus Christ might appear to Saint Victor. Sure, Jesus pops in from time to time, whatever. But then Voltaire shifts gears, and now he's rolling his eyes so hard you can hear it. Saint Benedict saw the soul of Saint Germanus of Capua carried up to heaven by angels. And then it gets crazier. 2 monks saw the soul of Saint Benedict walking on a carpet extended from heaven to Mount Cassino. So let's put this in New Age speak. He's saying a dead monk is skywalking on a floating rug. That's right, a floating rug, you heard that right, between heaven and a mountain monastery. And grown men saw this and called it Theology. Voltaire's funny because right after that, he just says, this is not quite so easy to believe, which is just French for you've lost all logic and I refuse to pretend otherwise. And what makes it even funnier? He's not just mocking a single story, he's basically laying out the origin story of your entire religion. Ghosts, rugs, fevered dreams, hallucinated chickens. This is the foundation. This is where it all comes from. And Voltaire's just calmly filing the paperwork. Voltaire continues his polite rampage with this. He says, it may likewise, without any offense to our august religion, be doubted. That's his classy way of saying, I'm not saying this is complete nonsense, I'm just saying anyone with a brain should doubt it. Now here come the soul beatings. First we get Saint Eusebius, a 5th century bishop, who reportedly got a special tour of hell courtesy of an angel. During his visit, he saw the soul of Charles Martelmain, yes, the grandfather of Charlemagne, burning down there. No scriptural backing, no evidence. Just one bishop, one angel, and no concern for subtlety. Then Voltaire takes us to the next masterpiece, he says, and a holy hermit of Italy saw the soul of Dagobert chained in a boat by devils who were flogging it without mercy. That's right. Dagobert, a 7th century king of the Franks, is now a ghost prisoner getting whipped by demons in a boat. You know, I think I would have liked to know Voltaire in real life. I think we could have been friends, him and I. Anyway, Voltaire continues in his deadpan way. He asks the obvious question. He says, it is rather difficult to explain satisfactorily how a soul can walk upon a carpet, how it can be chained in a boat, or how it can be flogged. Yeah, that would be because it's a soul. No body, no limbs, no nerve endings. But sure, let's throw in a paddle and a devil with a cat of 9 tails. Voltaire isn't even attacking basic theology at this point. He's attacking physics. Because this isn't theology. It's ghost stories written by people who failed basic metaphysics. Then, just to make sure no one misunderstands him, he adds, it may very well be that heated brains have had such visions. So he's saying that people believe this because they were overheated, sleep-deprived, or just really suggestible. And the final strike is this. He writes, one must be very enlightened to distinguish those which came from God himself from those which were purely the offspring of imagination. Yeah, because the church sure did, and they canonized them all. Voltaire saying what nobody else back in his time would say. Most of these visions weren't divine warnings. They were just religious acid trips dressed up in robes. And if you can't explain how a soul gets whipped on a boat, maybe stop building doctrines on it. All right, this next part is also real. It was preached at a royal funeral by Jacques Benny Bossuet, one of the most powerful Catholic voices in 17th century France. This wasn't some village priest. Bossuet was the Bishop of Meaux, the guy who tried to explain the book of Revelation to kings. He was called the Eagle of Meaux for his intense, thunderous sermons, the equivalent of a fire and brimstone preacher we see today in various places. Voltaire opens by quoting Bossuet's funeral oration for Anne of Gonzaga, the Princess Palatine, who was a powerful aristocrat from the House of Condé, rich, connected, and it appears spiritually wobbly. She had money, status, and political success. She lent her sister, the Queen of Poland, 100,000 francs, sold a duchy for $1 million, married her daughters into powerful families, but Bossuet says she had one flaw. She started doubting Christianity, not publicly, just internally. You know, like anyone who realizes their soul might not be a literal chicken. So, how did she come back to faith? Did she read the Bible, talk to a priest, reflect on those Bible scripture? Nope. She had 2 visions. She dreams of a man born blind. He says he has no concept of light, but he believes others who tell him it exists. Bossuet says, see, that's faith. You don't have to understand it, you just believe it because someone else told you it's true. Voltaire's subtext is dripping here. He basically says, okay, perfect. This is the church's entire sales pitch. Trust us, even when it makes no sense. Then comes the real showstopper. She gets sick. Seriously sick. Fever, delirium, the whole works. Voltaire calls it a violent shock of the membranes and fibers of the brain. That's 1700s code for her brain was frying. And in this state, she has a vivid hallucination. A hen is chasing after a chick. The chick is in the mouth of a dog. The princess grabs the chick from the dog. A voice yells at her, give him back his chicken. If you deprive him of his food, he won't keep watch. She yells back, no, I will never give it back. And that was her spiritual breakthrough. But Bossuet doesn't stop there. He interprets the dream, and this is not satire, this is what he actually said. He said, "The chicken is Anne of Gonzaga's soul. The hen is the church. The dog is the devil. The hallucination is a coded message from God. Her refusal to give the chick back means she has claimed efficacious grace and returned to the faith. So, to be clear, a royal woman hallucinates barn animals during a brain fever, and this becomes theological proof that she was saved." Voltaire doesn't even have to attack this because it's completely ludicrous. He just repeats it, lets you sit with it, and asks, is this really how we determine truth? Because when your faith depends on a hallucinated chicken rescue mission, maybe what you need isn't a bishop. Maybe it's a thermometer and a neurologist. Voltaire's now delivering his punchlines not with mockery, but with suffocating fake reverence, so thick it could choke a bishop. He reminds us that Bossuet didn't just ramble about chickens in a private letter. No, he preached it publicly, in Paris at the Carmelite convent of Faubourg Saint-Jacques, in front of the entire House of Condé, one of the most powerful aristocratic families in France. And what did he say? He said, "Hearken, and be especially careful not to hear with contempt the order of the divine warnings." So pretty much, don't laugh, don't question, just believe, because mocking this would insult divine grace. Voltaire's sarcasm kicks in with full legal flair. He's like, "The reader, then, must peruse this story with the same reverence with which its hearers listen to it." He's forcing you to sit with the stupidity. You're being told to treat a fevered chicken hallucination like a sacred mystery, like it's a Eucharist, not poultry psychosis. Now he decides to dig the blade in sideways, because Voltaire is quite ruthless, really. He says we should believe it because Bossuet did. And who is Bossuet? He lists the man's full resume like a legal deposition. Fought the nuns of Port Royal over a religious oath, argued with Paul Ferry over the catechism, debated Protestant Claude about the Catholic Church, fought Dr. Dupin on China, refuted Father Simon on how to interpret scripture, battled Cardinal Sfondrati on predestination, and even clashed with the Pope over the power of the French Church. Voltaire's point is that Bossuet was no fool. He was smart, ruthless, doctrinally obsessed, and even he believed the chicken story. So we should believe it too, right? Yeah, no. Voltaire drops the final shot like a dry, poisoned wafer. Let us adore the secrets of providence, but let us distrust the wanderings of the imagination, which Malebranche called la folle de logis, the mad woman of the house. That's it. That's his master jab. He's saying, believe in providence if you want, but don't trust your brain when it's on fire and seeing chickens. Voltaire isn't just mocking a vision, he's tearing apart the entire religious power structure that tells you not to laugh. Even when the theology is built on brain fever poultry metaphors. Bossuet, for all his brilliance, believed this, which proves that no one is immune to delusion when it comes wrapped in incense. And, as Voltaire gently reminds you, visions like this aren't vouchsafed to everyone, only the feverish and the gullible. All right, Voltaire is back on Holy Hallucinations, and this one's a classic. Saint Catherine of Siena, 14th century Dominican nun and mystic, claimed that Jesus appeared to her and married her, literally. He gave her a wedding ring, which was invisible to everyone else, of course, and she considered herself his bride for life. This was not a fringe claim, but it was embraced by major religious figures. Raymond of Capua, her confessor and biographer, swore it was real. Even Pope Urban VI backed it. So the church didn't just tolerate this, they venerated it. Now here's where Voltaire pulls the pin and drops the grenade. This mystical apparition is to be venerated, but it is rejected by the learned Fleury. Claude Fleury, respected historian and theologian, said, yeah, no, that's not credible. And then comes the death line. A young woman who should now boast of having contracted such a marriage might receive as a nuptial present a place in a lunatic asylum. He's laughing, saying, if someone today said Jesus married them in a private vision and gave them an invisible ring, we'd call for a psych evaluation, not a sainthood ceremony. Voltaire's not just pointing out that it's delusional, he's pointing out the double standard. In the 1300s, you're a saint. Now, you're sedated. Voltaire showing you that religious authority turns hallucinations into honor when it's convenient. But outside that bubble, it's just someone claiming to be spiritually married to a ghost man in the sky. The difference isn't the story, it's whether the church can use it. Voltaire saves one more ghost story for the finale. This time, Mother Angelica, the long-dead abbess of Port Royal, appears to a nun named Sister Dorothy, and not casually. No, she shows up in full abbess regalia, sits down in her old seat at the church, holding her crozier, and demands Dorothy be summoned so she can deliver terrible secrets. Voltaire just shrugs and says, "This is reported by Sieur Dufaus, a respected Jansenist writer." But then with his trademark dry twist, Voltaire says, "The testimony of Dufaus is of less weight than that of Raymond of Capua and Pope Urban VI." So we're already on thin ice with the whole Ghost Bride story, and this one has even less credibility. So he's saying, if you're going to believe one hallucination, you might as well believe them all. But let's not pretend every sex ghost is equally trustworthy. Then Voltaire pulls the ultimate troll move, which I greatly admire. Voltaire writes, "I have read the Abbé Langlet's 4 volumes on apparitions, and I think I ought not to take anything from them. So, yes, I've read the Ghost Encyclopedia. No, I won't be quoting it. Why? Because even though he says he's convinced by church-approved apparitions, he immediately adds, but he has some doubts about the others, until they are authentically recognized." That's his deadpan way of saying, I believe what the church tells me to believe and absolutely nothing else, because theology is only real when bureaucracy says so. Then he proceeds to slam the whole system. The Cordeliers and the Jacobins, the Jansenists and the Molinists have all had their apparitions and their miracles. Every sect, every faction, they've all got their ghost stories, their visions, their private miracles. It's not divine favor, it's church marketing. And then comes the final line, Iliacus inter muros peccatur et extra. There is sin both inside and outside the walls of Troy. Voltaire is saying it doesn't matter which theological team you're on, Catholic, Jansenist, Dominican, Molinist, everyone's full of it. No matter the uniform, the delusion plays out the same. Voltaire wraps it all up with a bow of sarcasm and Latin. Believe the visions if you must, but remember, every religious tribe has their own pile of hallucinations. The only miracle is that anyone still takes them seriously, and if a dead nun with a staff shows up to tell you secrets, maybe don't build doctrine around it, maybe call someone. So let's review. We've had a hallucinated husband in a courtroom, a murdered man's face showing up in a fish, a king seeing rivers of blood after a massacre, souls being whipped in boats, ghost monks walking on carpets from heaven, a princess arguing with a demonic chicken thief during a fever, and a dead nun showing up with a staff to spill secrets from beyond the grave. And Voltaire, he just calmly walks through each story and says, interesting, you might want to see a doctor. Because the truth is, if any of these visions happened today, you'd be institutionalized. But if it happened in a convent 400 years ago, you're a saint, or at least a best-selling sermon. Voltaire's not mocking suffering, he's mocking what happens after, how hallucinations become holy, how trauma becomes theology, how a woman with a fever becomes proof of ineffable truths, and how no one's allowed to laugh, because to question it is to blaspheme. So here's your final takeaway. If your religion needs ghosts, soul floggings, and poultry-based metaphors to stay afloat, maybe it's not divine truth. Maybe it's just centuries of spiritual theater with no intermission. And if Voltaire were alive today, he wouldn't need to write a new essay. He'd just scroll through your miracles playlist and say, same delusion, better lighting. Really enjoy making these Voltaire videos. I really enjoy reading his essays and understanding what he's saying back in the time he was saying it. It puts a new perspective on stuff we see nowadays. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, like, comment, and subscribe, or a ghost nun with a crozier will appear at the foot of your bed tonight and demand a blood oath to the Church of the Flying Carpet.